Now you're listening to Fantastic Formosa with John Abrams in Taipei. All right, welcome back to Fantastic Formosa. This is John Abrams. We are very fortunate to get Keith back. He's the shortwave guy. This is part 2. Keith has been everywhere in the world, and he's worked in shortwave all over the world. And a lot of this is pre-internet, before the internet. And one of the fascinating things about Keith is he worked for Cuban radio, shortwave. And for an American like myself, I find it very strange that he would work for a communist radio broadcast program on the island of Cuba during the Cold War, we call it.
Well, it was actually after the Cold War.
Oh, well, did we have an embassy there?
Well, they didn't have the U.S. at the time didn't have an embassy, but they had what was called a U.S. interest section.
Okay.
So if there was anything diplomatic that had to be done, the U.S. interest section would contact the Swiss embassy, and then the Swiss embassy was the in-between.
I remember 60 Minutes did a story about this. They interviewed the guy who ran that. And he said, what about these, we have a U.S., I don't know if anyone knows about that. The U.S. has a base on Cuba.
Guantanamo,
Yeah, a military base. And before the Cuban Revolution, Communist Revolution, we were there and we stayed. And we had a lease on the base and we refused to leave. But we have to pay on that lease.
Yeah.
We had to pay a check. So
same amount. As it was signed more than 100 years ago.
I don't think the amount is very impressive. But the 60 Minutes interviewed the American guy he says, yes, I present the check to the Cuban government, and they say, well, do they cash them? He goes, no, they don't get cashed. No. Castro, they said, puts them in his desk. Yep. There's a big stack of them inside his desk. And he refuses to. It's quite strange. A lot of folks get shocked that we have a base on Cuba. And I assume the Cuban government could probably take it. I don't know. Have you been anywhere near the base?
Well, you can't really get near it because there is what is the term they call it? A dead man zone or like a landmine zone before it. And there's a lot of Cuban military before it. So you can, if you have binoculars or a telescope, you can actually see it.
Right. And they have McDonald's and cinemas. And
it is. I know people that have went. That's gone there.
Very American.
Yeah.
Families live there. It's quite strange. If you're in the American military, you can bring your family with you if you're an officer. And they go to American schools on the base. And to think that they have this on Cuba is quite bizarre, that they have McDonald's and Pizza Huts and movie theaters and all this stuff, just like America. I think the lease is coming up, isn't it?
No, I mean, it's still ongoing.
Still ongoing?
Still ongoing, yeah.
To me, it's one of these strange stories you read about, and you don't believe it at first, and you realize it's true. But you tell us how you ended up in Cuba, of all places.
Well, I have always been of the belief, and I think this was put on to me by my parents. My father is French, my mother is Dutch. If you went to France and you mentioned my father's name, French people know him.
His first and last. They will
recognize his name. They will recognize his voice because my dad at one point went to the diplomatic service.
Oh, I see.
Just before I was born, but before that, and afterward he continued working as a journalist for France Inter, which is the public broadcaster within France. So I had a bit of and because my mother is Dutch, neither of them speak each other's respective language, and we lived in a lot of English-speaking countries, so English was the language that we used at home.
So your when your mother and father met, they had to go on an English-speaking date.
That's the only common language that they have. Except when they argue, which is very funny because then they start, my mother's speaking Dutch, they're yelling at each other in each other's language, and nobody understands it. I sit there and I laugh, it's
That's
very funny.
That's how I deal with my wife screaming at the kids in Chinese.
But, so I had this upbringing where we were always traveling to different countries. So like, I was 13 or maybe 14, and my dad was sent to work in East Berlin.
In the Cold War.
Yeah, in the former German Democratic Republic.
It was a very dark place.
I thought it was fascinating.
Oh,
as
a child you would.
Yeah, but my parents always said that if you want to really find out about the other side, you really have to go there and be within the community, and you get a really good understanding about why they think the way they do. I do know, because this is something that my parents found out 20 years ago, that neighbors that we had in our building were spying on us.
Of course. That was,
my parents put a request through to the German government department that overlooked the Stasi file, the East German secret police, right? But it wasn't a surprise.
No, it was like everyone spied on everyone else.
Yeah.
It was just part of the weird culture.
Yeah, but I mean, my parents had nothing to hide.
Right.
So
right.
They have a job to do,
right.
And they would come over because they said, they spoke very good English and German. And of course they were German, but they would speak to us mainly in German, and they would always ask do you have really good French coffee?
Oh,
do you have any fruit that you got from the diplomatic store?
Oh, I see.
So it's like they would give their little reports. But, in the school that I went to was the international school.
But you're foreigners in East Germany. You can have these things, right?
Yeah, because they had diplomatic stores.
And they really just want
hard currency.
They want this stuff.
Cuba. So how I ended up in Cuba was every place I travel, I would always go and visit the international broadcaster. First place I went after I got off the plane. Because for international broadcasters, we all know each other. Maybe we've never met before, right? So I found from the hotel, where is Radio Havana, Cuba located? Was walking distance. And I just went to the lobby, said, is head of English department here? Gave my name. And he came down, he goes, I've never, who are you? Oh, yeah, of course, we listened to this show you do, and I listened to them. So had a tour of the place. They interviewed me on Radio Havana, Cuba, why I was there on holiday. And just as a joke, because the weather there is beautiful, I said, are you looking for any presenters or producers? And then 3 months later, he contacted me. So I notified Radio Netherlands. I said, look, we don't have a bureau in Cuba. I was offered a job at Radio Havana, Cuba. Would you want me to work as a correspondent in Havana? And they said, yes. And I called Radio Havana, Cuba. I said, listen, Radio Netherlands will pay for my flight over. You won't have to pay for that.
All right.
And that's how it happened. And I have to be honest, it was a very happy time.
In Cuba?
It was very, very happy. It was a great time.
It must be good for a foreigner to be in Cuba.
No,
but not to be a Cuban.
This is the misconception that people have. I can tell you, okay, I was making hard currency.
That's a difference.
But at the same time, even if I wasn't at the age that I was then, I still would have done it. My salary was 350 Cuban pesos a month. Now, a doctor in Cuba makes 300 pesos. I was making 50 pesos more. That converts to around $15 a month.
That must create a little bit of, jealousy, maybe.
Well, no, not really. I mean, I had a ration book like everybody else.
All right.
Food rations, because it was during the really difficult period after the collapse of the USSR.
Yes.
So I had a ration book, and the ration book had things like, half a chicken once a month, 500 grams of coffee once a month, and so on and so on. Sometimes stuff didn't come into the local shop, so I had to get it on the black market.
Well, coffee for you is like a staple food.
Oh, it is, yeah. But Rum. Okay, this is the funny thing. So beer.
There must be a lot of rum in Cuba. They're
Beer.
famous for it.
24 bottles a month. The big bottles.
Oh, the big
24.
All right.
And one bottle of rum a week. Now, I'm not a big fan of rum. So what I did to make hard currency, did like all the other Cubans, sold it on the black market.
So, okay. All right.
I had a really nice apartment that was paid for by Radio Havana, Cuba. It was one of their apartments. The kind of apartment that I could work for the next 10 years nonstop. I would never be able to afford.
Mm-hmm.
And the car they gave me was a Polski 650, which was originally a Fiat car that was made in Poland.
Is that the kind you had to use a sledgehammer in the back to get
Yeah,
the
because the
pistons
car had so many problems. But
I'm not joking about the sledgehammer, folks.
if you watch the James Bond movie, GoldenEye, there's one of those cars in that movie.
The guy has to get the entire piston to turn over by hitting it with a sledgehammer.
There's truth in that. Trust me. There is truth in that. So, I mean, I could tell you why I was a happy time. Okay, first of all, the lifestyle there is phenomenal. There was so much to do. The beaches were beautiful, right? There were a lot of parties always happening somewhere. Second of all, working at Radio Havana, Cuba, I have never worked with a nicer bunch of people. Even the censors that we had, the censors that we had were they were amazing. Of course, they had a job to do, right? And the censors told me the funniest story. Because Monday to Friday, I was hosting the 2-hour broadcast to North America that was repeated for the West Coast. And then the 1-hour transmission that was for Europe and the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
But every second Saturday, I had to go in to read news. And I said to them, they said to me, before you read the news, scripts have to be handed over 24 hours before.
To the censor.
To the censors.
Now, what is a censor for those who don't know that
Well,
word?
a censor at Radio Havana, Cuba, just like in countries like that, or that in Eastern Europe, was they would make sure everything was following the government line and government policy and not criticizing the government.
Right, okay.
So you couldn't say Fidel was a nitwitter. You couldn't say that, of course. So they said scripts have to be handed over 24 hours before. And I said, yeah, but then it's not news. Then it's old. And then he went, psst, come here. What you do, the script from yesterday, put tomorrow's date on it. Read it today, then give it to us tomorrow. Oh, okay. I see it. That's, because they also knew that it was nonsense, But it was a very creative time. And it was a lot of fun because I found out that an idol of mine, who was a broadcaster, who I'd never met, but I listened to him.
What's an idol? Come on.
An idol is somebody that you really you want all to be like them.
It's like Superman. You want to be like Superman.
Yeah.
Right. He's your idol.
His name was Manolo de la Rosa. He was Cuban.
I'm sorry, I don't know who that is.
Manolo de la Rosa worked on Radio Moscow in the 1980s for 10 years.
All right.
And then went back to Cuba 1990. And he used to do a Spanish communications program on the Spanish service of Radio Moscow. And then he was back in Cuba. So one day I took the lift up to the sixth floor to see if he was in. And we started speaking. And to my shock, I was completely amazed. Now, we had never met. But as soon as I opened my voice, he knew my name. Because he used to listen to the Spanish program that I did for Radio Netherlands called Musicalmente Suyo in Spanish. Okay. And I was just amazed. Like, he was listening to me, right? And then he said, do you want to come on the program with me? And I came on as a guest. And then once every 2 weeks, I was coming on as a regular. And then he went on vacation. I hosted it in Spanish for 2 weeks. And then sometimes if the French announcer went away, I would go over to the French service. And it was the most creative time. We had wonderful sound engineers. My favorite was a sound engineer who's called Jose Costapupo. And I used to call him Babalu because he looked like, there was a TV show in the US in the 50s called I Love Lucy.
Yes.
And he looked like Lucille Ball's husband, Desi Arnaz. He looked just like Ricky Ricardo.
Oh, the Cuban.
The Cuban, yeah. And he looked like Ricky Ricardo. So I called him Babalu, which was a big hit for Desi Arnaz. It was a great time. I mean, it was funny because one of the reasons why they wanted... the other funny thing, this will shock you, but there were Americans that were there working already.
Working in a radio station as communists.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they weren't communists. I mean, they were just... Okay, one of them has a very interesting story. On the air, he's passed away now. On the air, his name was Langston Wright. He worked there for 20 years. But he went to Cuba in 1971 on a hijacked plane that he hijacked with his buddies from Miami to Cuba for the shooting of a U.S. state trooper in Texas. He was part of the Black Panthers.
So he's still wanted back home.
He was wanted by the FBI. If you go to the FBI website, they still have the picture of Michael Finney.
But he's dead.
Well, he's dead now, but they knew where he was, right?
Right.
And I just listened to Langston Wright, and then when I get there, meet him the first time. He was the news editor, English news editor. Thought his name was Mike Finney. He didn't say anything at the beginning, but then one day we were talking, and he's telling me the whole story, and doing a little bit of research. My God, that was fascinating, and it was so interesting. So interesting.
Yeah.
There was another woman by the name of her on-air name was Yolanda Fisher. Her real name was Leslie Baylog. There was also another American that was there, Isabel Garcia.
Was she, the Fisher, was she another of these hijackers?
No,
or?
Yolanda was from California.
Okay.
And she was a hippie in the 1960s. Still was a bit of a hippie. And she moved there because she was against, say, Ronald Reagan policies or whatever it was.
You moved to Cuba.
Yeah,
That's a little drastic.
Yeah. But there was another woman she was funny. Her name was Portia Singelbaum.
You got a joke in.
Yeah, Portia Singelbaum, Jew from the Bronx, right?
Portia doesn't mean what you folks think it
No.
means. The car has nothing to do with the word Porsche.
Right.
Can you explain what Porsche means?
Well, Portia's a name. It's a car, of course.
It's a car,
but it's also a very Jewish woman's name.
Yeah.
But she had married a Cuban official,
right,
and then went down there. But my God,
that's a little different.
But it was funny because she really looked like what we would call a Jewish American princess.
Oh, okay.
Really looked like Barbra Streisand, the whole deal,
Barbra Streisand.
Right? She worked in the English service, and she'd been living there for at least 3 decades. The accent from the Bronx never went away.
So she did learn Spanish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. In the French service, there were a couple of people from France. It was the thing about international broadcasters like this, Radio Havana or Radio Netherlands or Deutsche Welle. The staff, you never know who you're going to meet.
Yeah,
because everybody's from all around the world. It's like a mini United Nations almost. You know?
Yeah, your world, shortwave world that existed during that time period, was very tight, as we say. It's a very closed community. It's not closed in terms of people joining. It just said, that's just all there is. Really.
And the thing that I realized, even before I went to Cuba, and having met all these people, even some North Koreans that I'd met when I was there.
Oh no!
Because there were a lot of North Koreans
I've got to know
in
about
Cuba.
the North Koreans in Cuba.
But the Cubans, what I realized is that now Radio Havana, Cuba is like the propaganda voice of Cuba, right?
Of course, yeah.
And the thing is, the entire time that I was there, first, I knew what not to say, right? But I wasn't interested anyway in criticizing the Cuban government. I went there for a purpose.
Please tell us what your mission was.
Yeah, well, my mission was to make those 2 transmissions more entertaining than the way they were so dry.
Oh, yeah.
And to bring my sense of humor to them. That was my purpose.
If you want to listen to boring radio, listen to communist radio.
Yeah, exactly. But we had, his name was Jorge Miares. And, if you look up the word communist in a dictionary, you'd see his picture, right?
Oh, no.
But the thing is, he knew it was nonsense.
They're
very smart,
He wasn't what we call pushover.
Yeah, he wasn't a
If you
pushover.
push over somebody, that means they're easy to influence.
Yeah. I mean, they all knew it was nonsense, right?
Nonsense.
But they,
silliness.
it was a great place to work.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. I mean, there was one language section that was the weirdest one of all. And this is really odd. There's a language called Esperanto.
Yes,
Now-
I know what that is. Now explain what this language is.
Okay.
Because this is fascinating.
Esperanto was a created language. The idea was to create this language that can be used internationally.
Right.
That everybody can speak to and everybody communicate with.
Replaces everything.
Replaces everything. And it's actually very easy to learn.
Yeah.
It never caught on.
Nope.
But you know what the funny thing is?
They made a movie
William Shatner.
with William Shatner
Yeah.
from Star Trek where he only spoke that language.
Yeah.
With a girl, right?
With a girl, yeah.
Yeah, I saw it, and I thought, this is a beautiful language.
The funny thing about Esperanto, and somebody asked me once because it got me thinking, that's true. Esperanto never really caught on, right? But before 1989, before the Eastern Bloc in Europe fell apart, and then later the Soviet Union,
Right.
every communist radio station in Eastern Europe had an Esperanto language service.
How many people understand that?
I mean, at Radio Havana, Cuba, they had a daily 30-minute Esperanto language service. I think they got like 20 letters a year. And they were all from professors saying, what is the grammatic way? I mean, it was so silly, but it was a weird thing. It was like, they used to say it was the communist language. That was became known as.
How would you begin to learn that language in the first place?
It's easy. It's actually quite easy.
It's, but pronunciation, grammar, all that stuff.
Well, it makes it more simple than English, French, or Spanish.
Right.
So it's not that difficult.
But the problem is that it wouldn't work because if you made everyone learn it, they would add in their own words.
Yeah.
If I'm from France, I'd sneak in some French. If I'm Spain, I'd sneak in some only words that and it would just become a disaster.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was really funny. So there were a few like funny things that happened when I was there. So occasionally I would get invited to different embassy parties. And
They don't do that anymore. The U.S. embassies don't do it for security reasons anymore. So
it wasn't. I mean, I would go to the French embassy and stuff, and the whole thing was. I remember, this is how you survived in Cuba. For the embassies, right? You get to know the drivers who deliver the food from the airport. Ask them to make a detour. Say, here's a bottle of rum. Give me some lobster tail. Give me some toilet paper. I'll give you 5 cigars.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it was an interesting place, and I learned a lot when I was there. Like I said, the weather was beautiful. I mean, it was difficult for sure because the building that I lived in was the FOCSA building, FOCSA. It's the largest apartment building in the Caribbean. It was built by the Americans in the early 50s. It is gigantic. It's still around today. And my apartment, I still remember it, apartment 25D on the 25th floor. The building had 5 elevators.
Was it on the shore? Can you see the ocean?
Facing all of Havana. Most astonishing view ever.
Beautiful. Okay.
My apartment was on the 25th floor. 2 elevators were working. Sometimes they were broken, and you had to walk up. And they had a water schedule. 3 hours because the pumps.
Water to the roof.
And they didn't want it because the pumps were really old. They couldn't get replacement parts, right? So if the pumps broke down, sometimes I had to walk up 24 flights, walk down 25 flights, and walk down 25 flights. If there was no water, because the water was 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours at night. If there was no water, carry buckets going up and down,
So you can do that when you're young, but
the thing is, I didn't. For me, it was an adventure.
But at the same time, this is the frustration of it. You get halfway down, you say, "Oh, I forgot something. I have to go back up."
Well, then you keep going down and say, "I'll get it the next time."
Yeah, I think I would just, I'd ask for a second floor condo.
But you can't. The thing I was like, with places like this that I visited or I have lived, right? There's two kinds of people. There's people that'll go to these places and all they do is complain, and they're never really happy, right? My attitude has always been, look, make the best of it. Everybody else is doing it. You're nothing special. Fine. Think of it as an adventure. Maybe it'll make you stronger. Maybe you'll learn something from it. So it doesn't really bother me. It doesn't really bother me. In our building, it was also quite international as well.
Oh, wow. So you're meeting people from all over the world.
Yeah, some strange places. I mean, there were also a lot of Cubans in the building because their families bought apartments before 1959, before the Cuban Revolution.
They kept them?
They kept them, yeah.
They were able to do that because a lot of property was seized.
Yeah. But they were able to keep it.
Wonder why.
Maybe they had connections within the government, But on the second floor was a group of North Koreans.
Second
floor. Now, this apartment building at one time had a swimming pool. So the North Koreans filled in the swimming pool to make a garden.
What?
Yeah. Well, the swimming pool is broken anyway,
Well, okay, but still.
There's nothing else you can do with it because it was too old, right? So many years before I arrived, the North Koreans had already filled it. They made a garden into it. And I thought, I've never met a North Korean. I want to see what they're like. So I went down to the second floor. There were two of them that spoke English. And, we had some great times, great in the evenings. Drinking rum. They would make fresh kimchi.
Oh, no.
They would make their own Japanese alcohol in the bathroom, like bathtub gin. Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. And it was really funny because most North Koreans, let's say, that go to other countries, either to study or in diplomatic missions, always have minders with them.
Yes.
Except in Cuba.
I've seen this.
Except in Cuba.
Really?
Yeah, because where are they going to go?
So they're having some fun.
They were having some fun, right? And they would always say to me, how many dollars do they pay you? How many dollars do they pay you? And I said, why do you need hard currency? They say, and they would complain about their government, which was really funny.
Oh, well, they're alone. They feel safe.
Yeah. And they told me a joke, and I laughed so hard because it was a joke that I'd heard from East Germans and I'd heard from from former Soviet citizens. It's like the joke that just goes everywhere.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, everybody who's in that world.
Yeah, and you will love this joke, and I could tell it because it's so clean and just so silly. So there's a guy, he goes to the phone company, and he says, I want to have a phone installed. And they said, okay, we will come in 15 years from today. Here's the receipt. And the guy asking for the phone says, are you going to come in the morning or in the afternoon? And the guy at the phone company says, does it matter? It's in 15 years.
Yeah.
And he says, well, I have the gas man coming in the morning. And I've heard this joke from people from all these communist countries, the same joke, it's so funny. But I actually had a good relationship with them. We would, because some of the stuff I got on my ration card I didn't like. And they wanted to make some hard currency. Right. So I said, listen, I have an idea. If I could put some jars together, do you want to jar up your kimchi and we can sell it on the black market for like $1 a jar? And he went, his eyes lit up. He said, you help me with that. You help me. Yeah, I'll help you with that. So I had a little kimchi side business. They were really nice people. I don't know what happened to them. They were in Cuba to study medicine.
Well, I've heard this before, actually, that Cuba had a good hospital, basic hospital training program.
I mean, I was quite impressed by it. But yeah, it was. I mean, there were things you didn't go into so much. But what I found funny is every time I would, there were a few that were in Radio Havana, Cuba in management that were like super revolutionary, right? But if you went to a Radio Havana, Cuba party and they were drinking, they were not so revolutionary anymore.
In a group, that could be dangerous because they could certainly tell on them later.
Well, they didn't really do that. I mean,
all right.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anybody or coming across anybody that would have ever done that.
Okay.
You know, they were, like I said, I mean, I knew that when I made international phone calls, my phone calls would be monitored.
Sure,
right?
Of course.
But it was really old school. It's like the kind of thing where somebody just picks up another phone.
You actually listen.
And you can hear the background, right?
It wasn't like taped or recorded.
And
anyway.
somebody told me, try this experiment one day. I said, okay. They said, because the people that monitor your phone call can only monitor maybe in 2 languages, Spanish and English. And they said, you make an international phone call, start speaking German or Dutch or French. So one day, I called a friend of mine in the U.S. From the phones. Right. Had to be done through Mexico.
All right.
And I knew that he spoke German. And I said, I want to make, so it was like waiting 30 minutes to get a line. And he answered, I said, meine Freund, ¿cómo estás? I was speaking German. And in the background in Spanish, I can hear, I can't understand what he's saying. What do I do? And I hung up. It was very interesting. I find it interesting.
They don't want to take responsibility for it, so they just hang up.
They just hang up because they realize, what do we do?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but you know, like I said,
and get yelled at because I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, but like I said, you know, the weather was was phenomenal. You know, and everybody was so nice. Everybody was so nice.
Now, a lot of Americans started going down there and just a holiday, I guess, curiosity.
But even before the relationship got better between the U.S. and Cuba, a lot of Americans went down. You went if I went to Veradero Beach, which is the main beach area, running into Americans was so common because they couldn't fly direct, but they would fly through Mexico or they'd fly through Canada. And if you had a U.S. passport, the Cubans never stamped it.
Yes.
They would give you a piece of paper.
Right.
They would stamp that, and then when you leave, you give it back.
Yeah. Some countries do that, actually.
Yeah. So the embargo and preventing Americans going down there didn't really work,
right,
you know?
Right.
And they were so... it was really funny. And it was like just regular holiday makers. They couldn't care about Castro. They wanted to go to a nice beach that just wasn't overrun with tourists.
Was it like the Cubans would then demand American dollars rather than Cuban?
Well, they wouldn't demand it, but it's like if you could give them American dollars, they would prefer that. You know.
But, yeah.
And the thing, what used to really annoy me, and it still does annoy me when I go to developing countries, right? Is let's say to a market. The thing that annoys me is if I see, say, Europeans, Canadians, or Americans or Australians, they go there and then they're trying to say it's something is $20, right? And they're trying to negotiate $1 off the price. I'm like, it doesn't matter to you. It matters a lot to them. To them, just pay it. Don't try to take off $1 off the price. You know, in Cuba, I never. I even the Americans that were there that I would even talk to, there was the very famous bar in Havana
the Hemingway place.
Yeah, well, there was 2. There was called La Floridita, which was his place.
That was Ernest Hemingway. Writers, hangout back in the day
in the 50s.
Yeah.
Another one called El Bodeguita de Medio, where he also used to go, and everything there you pay for in U.S. dollars, right?
Right. Did they have pictures of him on the wall or something?
Oh, in the Floridita, the bar stool was there. Above it, a picture of him at that bar stool.
Right.
You cannot sit at that bar stool.
All right. How do they keep people from doing that?
They just say, please do not sit here. This is in respect for Ernest Hemingway.
This is the legendary. Okay.
Yeah.
I know somewhere they found on one of his old desks, one of these styles that have 15 drawers and hidden drawers, and apparently about 20 years ago they found some of his papers in one of these drawers. I don't know if it's Florida or Cuba or something. But,
well, in Cuba, Cubans, I mean, Ernest Hemingway, from what I remember, he was a bit of an enigma.
I mean, enigma is something that's hard, like a riddle. It's something hard to understand.
Very hard to understand
complex.
Because he was friends with people like Fidel Castro.
Right.
You know, at the same time.
But he was a journalist.
He was a journalist, but also friends with people on the other side, you know?
Right. Journalists do that.
Yeah. And the thing about, Fidel Castro, I was only ever in the room once where he was at a press conference.
Live?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He was maybe the distance of like just a few meters. And at the end, he came. This is, again, where I say, even he is a bit of an enigma, because afterward, he thanked personally for coming. Mm-hmm. But he could be evil at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like this weird kind of thing. So he thanked everybody afterward. And the thing I remember most of all, because it was for a conference that was being held in Havana called Peace for Cuba. And it was some American churches that organized donations for Cuban schools. So he went down for this. He went to this conference to thank everybody.
Okay.
So he had a press conference later, and there was a reception later, and he was there. And then before he left, he was going around talking to everybody. And this is the one thing that I always remember. And it was very funny. So there were two nuns there from the U.S., some Catholic, from some monastery in the U.S.
Charity or something?
I don't remember. But they're like the typical Catholic nun thing with the habits. And he starts talking to them. One of them was very pretty. And he starts flirting with her.
Oh, no.
And she started like all red and everything. And he goes, "It's okay, sister. I know you can't do anything. It's just a bit of fun." He was very charming. He was very, very charming. And he spoke English quite well.
Yeah, he went to New York just to try out for baseball team. New York
Well,
Yankees,
he played baseball for the Cuban team.
But he also tried out for the New York Yankees, right?
The Yankees. He was a wrestler, very athletic.
People are like really freaked out.
Yeah. So like when I met him, he was like in his 70s already.
All right.
But still, like he's one of those people that like when you're in the room with him, the room feeling changes. Do you understand what I mean? Because
yes, he has a what do you call
a lot of charisma.
Charisma. Yeah, he has charisma, aura. He's in the room just by
And his hands were so big.
Really?
When shaking hands, I'm like,
Huge. Okay. He, a very complex history.
Yeah.
And you actually got to shake hands with him? No pictures?
No. Well, no, I do have pictures from the Cuban newspaper Grandma, who were there taking pictures. But it was, the thing that's interesting is, like I said, look, everybody I meet, I treat them the same way. Because I'm a curious person.
Sure.
I'm a curious person, and I find that it's like the expression, you get more flies with honey than you do vinegar.
People lecture me about that because of my more recent writing, but I think, there's a point where it gets a little strange, and then I just say no more.
Yeah.
You have to have a line, I think, in the sand.
But, so it's like I mean, they, of course, did a lot of bad things. There's no doubt about that.
Sure.
But
I'm not writing anymore for staff, as a staff member of a journalism but you're right. Making friends with unusual people is necessary in journalism. Even if a fiction writer, they have to meet everybody.
Yeah.
And you're right. You have to treat them as equals.
Well, it's the thing, like you treat everybody with respect, the same respect.
Right.
You're going to get it back. And if any day you need help or assistance with somebody, maybe it's not the first person that you would call, but you know that there's always somebody that you can talk to. At the time, the foreign minister for Cuba was a guy, it was Ricardo Aracon, and then became Roberto Robaina. Ricardo Aracon was... A lot of people were suspecting that when Fidel stepped down as president, Ricardo Alarcón would take over. Another one who was very charismatic, very funny, spoke beautiful English. And he as well, I had met him more often because he was foreign minister.
But his brother took over.
Yeah, and his
right?
brother took over. Fidel's brother took
I
over.
thought that was very much predictable, though, right?
Well, it wasn't. I think a lot
Really?
of people didn't want the job,
Right.
you know.
Oh. Okay.
But, I remember meeting Aller Khan, and we were talking about this, and I asked him a very direct question. It was in an interview. We're just chatting over drinks at the Foreign Correspondents Club that was in Havana.
They have one.
They had one. I don't know if they still do.
Oh, wow. Foreign Correspondents Club is a place, they have one in almost every capital in the world. And all the foreign journalists go there and have meetings, and they'll have a happy hour Friday night or something.
Well, it wasn't official. It was just a bar where everybody showed up.
Yeah,
and even
well,
Cuban journalists would show up.
We
and,
have that
yeah.
here. We don't really have a bar or a clubhouse.
Yeah, and it was a good place to go to get talk to people off the record and stuff. So Ricardo Radicon was there, and I'm having a gin and tonic, he's having a beer, and we're just talking. And I said, I have to ask you honestly. I said, you're boss, right? I said, in the old days of the Soviet Union, you had guys like Brezhnev and Lenin, Stalin. They all wanted to have statues of themselves.
Sure.
What about your boss? And he goes, no. He said no, never.
Fidel. Oh.
Fidel. And we started talking more, right? And he said, to be honest, he said, the relationship we had with the Soviet Union was, and it's a word I cannot say on radio, it was really one-sided, right? And that was it. And then I was a week went by, and his personal assistant gave me a phone call, and she said, would you be free in the afternoon? We want to give you a tour of one facility outside of Havana. So I said, okay. So we went on this tour. Now, at the time, Cuba was exchanging stuff. So sugar for whatever goods they would send, because Cuba had a lot of sugar.
Oh, of course.
So they brought me this place outside of Havana, and he said, he was there waiting for me. And he said, do you want to see how bad this exchange was? And he told the guards, open up the warehouse. They pulled the doors aside. I started laughing. You know what was inside? Snow plows. The Soviets sent snow plows to Cuba in exchange for sugar. These were snow plows they'd sent in 1975. They were rusting away, and he went, this is what it was like.
Couldn't they modify them somehow?
There was anything you can do with them. They were designed to be snow plows.
Sell them to Canada?
Who wants to buy some old Soviet equipment,
Yeah, I'm an old farm boy, so I would have just tore them apart and.
Well, they used to salvage the motors from them.
Yeah,
but that's what they sent,
diesels.
and it wasn't the only thing. I mean, they sent some of the silliest things. They sent skis.
Of course, you need skis for
the beach.
Did you? My God. I think the engines would be about all you could use.
The engines were all they did use. They put them in old cars, and
But the truck itself does carry salt, and it.
No, it didn't carry salt.
Oh,
it had a
really?
big snowblower in front.
Oh, okay. It was anything like sand or salt in the back.
Nope, just a snowblower.
Okay.
About 50 of
how
them.
about for the beach, maybe? You could blow sand back into the ocean or something.
I mean, that's why, I realized in Cuba you have to have a sense of humor about things.
That's a documentary right there. That's just the most beautiful scene.
I mean, if there was more time, there's some really funny things that I experienced, but there's of course no time for it. But maybe one day I'll write a book. Maybe one day. Well, I've been writing it, but I don't like writing. I'd rather have somebody write it for me. But Anyway.
Well, the funniest thing I ever heard at the end of the Soviet Union's days is that they maintained their production quotas by with tractors, for example, farm tractors. Yeah. They assemble them and they park them, and then they disassemble them and redo it again, just to show that they produced the same number every month.
As a good Russian friend of mine said, he was from New York, but he lived in the Soviet Union because his parents were Russian. And he said, this is what the Soviet Union is like. We pretend that we work. They pretend they pay us.
Yeah, apparently it doesn't work very well. Your life experience is rare, and you really don't have a plan when you start out in life, did you? You just seem to gravitate towards the things you enjoy to do.
Well, people that work in international broadcasting, especially not anymore, but my generation, the last generation that went into international broadcasting, everybody had exactly the same kind of life. It was the same kind of thing.
Of
the
course.
reason why we went into it.
Yeah, there was radio. That's it. Yeah.
But today, as I said earlier, people today, broadcasters and broadcast journalists, I think they go into it for different reasons. I didn't go in it to change anybody's mind on anything. I went into it because I found it interesting. I'm not there to change somebody's mind. They can believe whatever they want. I will cover any story. I'm not going to put my own personal feelings in it because that is not my responsibility.
But you're not a guy that went into it saying, "Oh, this is where the money is."
No, because there's no money in it. There is no money in it in this business.
So how do you feed yourself?
Well, I mean, it's the kind of thing like, many years ago, somebody, a younger guy I met, he said, he was thinking of going into radio. And I said, why? He said, because I hear of, in broadcasting, in broadcasting in general, there's maybe 3 or 5% that make a lot of money. Everybody else doesn't.
Right.
We do it because we like it. We enjoy it.
Right.
We have fun with it.
Right.
But if you think you're going to make money from it, unless you're like a top, like in the top like 3% that's making like $2 million a year, forget it.
Right. And I don't know if there are any people like that in radio anymore.
Yes, there are. Howard
really?
Stern, I can think of one.
Howard Stern is more of a
and there's many others as well.
Right?
There's many others as well.
Is he broadcast still on radio?
Yep. No, but it's satellite radio now.
I find him to be too obnoxious for my age group. I
like Howard Stern.
When I was
He's
younger,
changed.
When I was younger, yeah. But
he's changed. He's a really good interviewer now.
Yeah, he's getting to be a little bit. But yeah, there were times when I thought, "Oh, that's way over the line,"
But again, that's why if you want to change something and do something that's different, sometimes you have to cross that line.
It was more like we call them shock jocks, shock journalism. He'd say things just to make people angry,
just to get a reaction
for no reason. Yeah. And it was like, oh, wait a minute, it's not funny, and it's
but just, then his audience grew. I mean, this is the thing, But it's weird. I mean, radio, and of course now with doing television work, it's something that I just enjoy doing because, again, like I said, you meet all kinds of interesting people, even people that you think that you would not like. You end up liking them. I don't care what their background is. Like I said, those North Koreans that were in my building, they were nice people. I had a good time with them.
I've had some very strange experiences with North Koreans in other countries, and they don't know how to behave around me, and I'm always just fun-loving, and it's very hard to get them to break down and enjoy themselves.
Or give them a drink. Here's a gin and tonic.
I've not been around them in bars, mostly in conferences and things like academic conferences. And you can spot them right away. The haircuts.
Yeah.
And they're standing next to each other like they're hiding behind each other almost.
Look at their. They're a bit afraid, but...
I get it. Yeah, I get it. Hey, thanks for coming on.
No problem. It was a lot of fun.
And you're just an amazing person to listen into. Is there anything you want to promote real quick?
Niet, my friend. Nothing at all. I'm going back to my regular voice, Igorov Maravazorov.
His Russian, the old Russian. Well, that's it for Fantastic Formosa this week. And I hope everyone has a good week. All right, cheers.